The ocean was restless that night, but restless doesn't even cover it. Locals along the coastline swore they'd never heard the waves so loud, as if the sea itself had something to say. It was the kind of storm that could peel shingles off a roof and fling them into the black sky. October 4th, 2004. Most people in the small coastal town of Brenton were locking up for the night, pulling curtains tight, and settling in by flickering candlelight. But somewhere in the middle of all that, 19-year-old Mara Ellis made a choice that would become the last anyone saw of her alive. The clock on the gas station wall read 10:42 p.m. The security footage, grainy and monochrome, showed her stepping inside, dripping wet in a red raincoat. Her hood was pulled low, but her face was visible enough for her friends to later confirm it was her. She clutched a small brown paper bag to her chest, as if afraid the storm might rip it away. Lightning flared through the glass doors behind her, casting her silhouette into stark relief. She looked over her shoulder twice before stepping to the counter. The attendant, a middle-aged man named Carl Turner, remembered her hands shaking as she handed over cash. She looked like someone who'd just seen something she couldn't explain, Carl said later in his police statement. Not scared of the storm, scared of something else. She paid, took her change without a word, and walked out into the night. The footage catches her pausing in the doorway, turning her head as if she heard something. But there's nothing on the tape behind her, just empty, rain-smeared parking lot. By sunrise, her car, a blue sedan with a cracked rearview mirror, was found on a muddy road that led toward the cliffs. The driver's door hung open. Keys were still in the ignition. The wipers were frozen mid-swipe, one blade halfway up the windshield like an arm reaching out. A single set of footprints led into the tall, wet grass. They stopped abruptly after about 15 feet. Beyond that, there was only mud and sea spray. When police called her mother, Evelyn Ellis, to the scene, they expected shock. They expected tears. Instead, she arrived in a long coat, hair perfectly pinned despite the wind. She took one long look at the car, pressed her lips together, and said to the officer, "It's just like I feared." She didn't explain what she meant, and she never would. The first 2 days after someone vanishes are the most critical. That's what every detective will tell you. In Mara Ellis's case, those 48 hours would be full of movement, noise, and speculation, but almost no answers. When dawn broke the morning after the storm, Brenton's streets looked like they'd been through a war. Fallen tree branches blocked small roads. Power lines dangled like limp ropes, swaying in the wind. The storm had chewed up evidence before the investigation could even begin. But the abandoned car was impossible to ignore. Detective Mark Halverson arrived just after sunrise. He'd been with the Brenton Police Department for 14 years, but the image of that open driver's door, the wipers stuck mid-motion, and those solitary footprints heading into nothing, he would later call it the most unnerving crime scene of my career. The search began quickly. Volunteers gathered in raincoats, boots sloshing in the wet earth, eyes scanning the horizon for a flash of red fabric. The Coast Guard sent boats to comb the jagged coastline, while a helicopter traced wide circles overhead. Lacey Miller, Mara's best friend since kindergarten, joined the search party that morning. She told anyone who would listen. She wouldn't just walk away. She's not like that. Something happened to her. Someone took her. The police interviewed everyone who might have seen Mara in the hours before she disappeared. The gas station attendant confirmed she'd come in alone. No one saw another car follow her when she left. Then they spoke to Ryan Foster, Mara's boyfriend of nearly a year. He admitted they'd argued earlier that day, but insisted it was over something small. His alibi was that he'd been home, fixing his motorcycle during the storm. But neighbors later told police they hadn't heard the motorcycle engine once that night. By the end of day one, the missing persons report had been filed, and Mara's photograph was circulating around town. Flyers went up on telephone poles, shop windows, and the bulletin board in front of the library. Day two brought the media. Local news vans parked outside the Ellis home, their cameras waiting for Evelyn to step outside. But she never did. She refused interviews, declined to speak to search organizers, and didn't even walk the surrounding area. One volunteer later remembered knocking on her door to invite her to join the search. Evelyn opened it just wide enough to speak. Her words chilled him. "I already know you won't find her out there." By the second night, the rain had returned in a lighter drizzle, but the hope in Brenton felt heavier. There were no new leads, no new sightings. Just an abandoned car, a missing girl, and a mother who seemed almost resigned. Detective Halverson wrote in his notes that evening, "Something about Evelyn Ellis isn't right. She's holding something back. But is it grief or guilt?" By the end of the first week, the official search had slowed. The helicopters were gone, the Coast Guard scaled back, and volunteers went back to work and school. But in Brenton, Mara's absence was still everywhere. In the empty seat in her college classroom, in the unused locker at the community gym, in the posters that flapped against wet telephone poles. And when the searching slowed, the talking began. This was a small town, the kind where secrets never stayed secret for long. But Mara's disappearance felt different. It was as if her absence had opened a vacuum that people rushed to fill with their own stories. One rumor spread quickly: Mara was pregnant. The theory went like this. She had confided in a close friend weeks earlier, saying she was scared and didn't know what to do. But when police pressed that friend, she shook her head and refused to confirm it. "I can't talk about that," she whispered. "Not with her gone." Another rumor claimed Mara was having an affair with a married man. Some said it was her boss at the diner. Others whispered it was an older fisherman she'd met at the docks. Each version changed slightly, depending on who told it. And then there were the darker stories. Some insisted Mara had been planning to run away, that she wanted to leave Brenton, start fresh somewhere far from her mother's strict watch. A girl from her college claimed Mara had asked how much bus tickets to Portland cost. The police followed every lead. They interviewed co-workers, classmates, even distant relatives. Each rumor promised answers, but led only to dead ends. Meanwhile, Evelyn's behavior fueled the fire. She refused to let reporters inside the house. She turned away search organizers who knocked on her door. And she never once joined a search party. For a mother whose daughter had just vanished, her absence was impossible to ignore. One night at a town hall meeting, when neighbors pleaded with her to help rally the community, she stood up, her voice cold and clipped. "You don't need to look for Mara. She's not where you think she is." The room fell silent. Some people thought it was grief talking. Others thought it was madness. But a few, the ones who remembered the hard set of Evelyn's jaw, the way her eyes never wavered, wondered if she knew more than she was saying. Detective Halverson scribbled in his notes again. "Evelyn is either the most broken-hearted mother I've ever met, or she's the key to everything." But without evidence, the case stalled. And so the rumors grew louder, each one darker than the last, until Mara's story began to feel less like a tragedy and more like a ghost tale whispered across the town. And that's when the investigation itself began to unravel. After the first frantic weeks, after the search parties dwindled and the helicopters stopped circling the cliffs, Brenton began to sink into an uneasy quiet. Mara's disappearance was still on people's lips, but less like an emergency and more like a lingering wound that wouldn't heal. Every few months, someone would mention her name in hushed tones at the diner, or glance at the Ellis house as they drove by, curtains forever drawn. By 2006, just 2 years later, the official investigation was already cold. Detective Mark Halverson would later admit, "We had nothing. No body, no suspect, no crime scene. Just a car, a storm, and a girl who vanished into the night." The Ellis family withdrew from public life. Evelyn, Mara's mother, stopped attending church. She no longer did her grocery shopping in town, choosing instead to have supplies delivered. The once well-kept Ellis home began to decay. Paint peeled on the shutters. Weeds grew high in the yard. Inside, Caleb, Mara's younger brother, just 14 when she disappeared, lived like a shadow. Friends noticed he stopped inviting anyone over. He skipped sleepovers, never joined sports, and avoided questions about his sister. It was like Mara never existed when you were around him, one former classmate recalled. If you mentioned her, his face just went blank. Evelyn herself became a kind of ghost in Brenton. Neighbors rarely saw her outside. And when they did, she didn't stop to chat. She would just give a curt nod and disappear inside. Rumors grew with every year of silence. Some believed Evelyn couldn't bear the shame of the whispers about Mara's supposed pregnancy. Others insisted Evelyn knew exactly what had happened, and that was why she stayed so silent. The town's interest flickered back to life occasionally. In 2010, on the 6th anniversary, a new detective tried to re-examine the case. He reopened files, re-interviewed old witnesses, even requested fresh cadaver dog searches along the cliffs. But every lead crumbled just like before. The ocean and the storm had swallowed too much. And so the case slipped further into the past. Mara became less of a person and more of a legend. Kids at the high school whispered about her like she was a ghost story, the girl in the red raincoat who disappeared into the storm. By 2015, more than a decade later, only the flyers remained, weathered, sun-bleached scraps still clinging to the occasional telephone pole, long forgotten by most. But not by Evelyn. Inside that shuttered house, she lived in silence. She never moved away, never sold the home, never left Britain. People wondered why. Why cling to the place that had taken so much? The truth was hidden behind her attic walls, and it would stay hidden for 21 long years. The years dragged on, and the town of Brenton almost forgot about Mara Ellis. She was still a ghost, still a whisper, but no longer an open wound. People grew older, moved away, raised families. Mara was frozen in time, 19 forever. And then, in the summer of 2025, Brenton woke up to a shock. Evelyn Ellis, Mara's mother, was dead. It happened quietly, almost too quietly. A neighbor, who noticed the grass had grown too tall and the newspapers were piling on the porch, called the sheriff. When deputies forced their way in, they found Evelyn in her bedroom. She had passed in her sleep, alone, her body already still for days. The town reacted with mixed emotions. Some felt sorrow. Evelyn had suffered enough in life, losing her daughter without answers. Others whispered, again, about her silence. She took her secrets with her. One woman muttered at the grocery store. "Now we'll never know what really happened," said another. But they were wrong. When Evelyn's death was reported, Caleb Ellis, now a man in his 30s, returned to Brenton for the first time in years. He came not as the quiet, broken boy the town remembered, but as a stiff, careful man. He avoided most of the townsfolk, declined offers of help, and set about sorting through the decaying family home. The house was suffocating. Dust thickened every surface. Mold crept up the wallpaper. It smelled of damp, stale air, and untouched years. Caleb worked room by room, boxing clothes, furniture, and papers. But the attic, no one had touched the attic in decades. It was while cleaning there, among the wooden beams and cobwebs, that he stumbled on it. At first, it was just a rusted metal box, shoved deep into a corner beneath a pile of moth-eaten blankets. The box was heavy, its lock broken years ago. Caleb knelt down, dust swirling in the shaft of light from the tiny window. His hands trembled as he pried it open. Inside, he found things he didn't expect. Not jewelry, not keepsakes, but documents. Dozens of them. At the top was a missing persons flyer of his sister Mara, yellowed and creased, as if Evelyn had folded and unfolded it 1,000 times. Beneath that, medical records, letters, and then a journal, Evelyn's journal. The handwriting was jagged, desperate. The entries spanned years, decades even, covering everything from her heartbreak after Mara's disappearance to her suspicions about what really happened that night. Caleb froze as he read, realizing his mother hadn't lived in silence. She had lived with a terrible knowledge. And hidden deep in the pages, underlined again and again, was a single name. A name no one in Brenton had ever linked to Mara's vanishing. The storm that had gone quiet for 21 years was about to break open again. Caleb sat in the dimly lit attic, dust swirling around him, the weight of the rusted box heavy in his lap. The air was thick, still, as if the house itself was holding its breath. His mother's journal rested open in his hands. The first entries were what he expected, grief spilling across the page. Evelyn wrote about sleepless nights, about searching through woods and ditches when the police gave up, about praying for a phone call that never came. Her words bled pain, raw and unfiltered. I hear her voice at night. I hear Mara calling my name from outside the window. But as Caleb flipped through the pages, something shifted. Evelyn hadn't just grieved. She had suspected. One entry stood out, dated 3 weeks after Mara vanished. The police are wrong. Mara did not leave on her own. I know who she went to meet that night. She trusted him. Everyone in this town trusts him. But I saw it. I saw the way his eyes followed her. Caleb's stomach twisted. His mother had written a name, scribbled, scratched out, and then written again in darker ink as if forcing herself to admit it. Pastor Thomas Weller, Brenton's beloved pastor, the man who had prayed at every vigil, who comforted Evelyn with scripture, who stood before the town and urged them not to lose hope. Evelyn's words trembled on the page. No one will believe me. He is God's man in their eyes. But I saw Mara leave that night. I saw her cross the road. She was going to him. Caleb's hands shook as he turned the page. Each entry seemed more frantic, more certain. She wrote of strange late-night phone calls, of letters Mara received and quickly hid. She wrote of a car that parked across the street in the shadows, headlights off, engine running. And then one entry made Caleb's blood run cold. I confronted him. I told him I knew. He smiled. He said I should stop asking questions if I wanted Caleb safe. That's when I understood. I can't speak. Not to the sheriff. Not to anyone. I am trapped in this silence. The pieces fell into place. Evelyn hadn't been silent all these years out of indifference. She had been silenced by fear. Fear of a man the entire community trusted. Fear that no one would protect her son if she spoke. The journal ended abruptly in 2010. A final note scrawled in the margins read, "If anyone finds this, look to the church basement. That's where the truth begins." Caleb closed the journal, his chest heaving. The storm outside rattled the attic window, thunder cracking as if echoing his dread. For the first time in 21 years, he had something real, not just rumors, not just grief. His mother had left him a map, and that map pointed straight to the one place Brenton had always considered holy, the church. The storm had passed by the next morning, but Brenton felt different. It wasn't just the weather, it was Caleb driving down Main Street with his mother's journal on the passenger seat. Every word he'd read the night before echoed in his head. Pastor Thomas Weller, the town's most trusted man, the man his mother feared, the man who might know what happened to Mara. Caleb pulled into the church parking lot. It was early, the lot empty, the morning fog still hugging the gravestones across the road. The church loomed tall, its white steeple stabbing into the pale sky. To most, it was a symbol of safety. To Caleb, it now looked like a cage of secrets. He slipped inside. The sanctuary was empty, sunlight slanting through stained glass, coloring the pews in fractured blues and reds. He had sat in this room as a boy, next to his mother, listening to Weller preach about forgiveness. Now, with her journal in his pocket, forgiveness was the last thing on his mind. The basement door was at the back, half hidden behind the choir loft stairs. Caleb hesitated. His mother's final note burned in his memory. If anyone finds this, look to the church basement. That's where the truth begins. The air grew colder as he descended. The basement smelled of damp stone, mildew, and something else, something metallic. He flicked on a weak light bulb that buzzed overhead. The space was cluttered, old folding chairs stacked against the wall, hymnals covered in dust, broken nativity sets, cardboard boxes of forgotten donations. It looked ordinary, but Caleb knew his mother hadn't been wrong. There had to be something here. Then he saw it. In the far corner, behind a row of rusting filing cabinets, was a locked storage room. The heavy door looked out of place, reinforced with iron hinges and a padlock that gleamed newer than everything else in the basement. Caleb's pulse raced. He tugged the lock, pulled at the handle, but it didn't budge. He crouched to peer through a gap beneath the door. Darkness, but not silence. A faint drip, drip, drip echoed from inside. Caleb backed away, his heart pounding. He didn't know what was in there, but he knew one thing. His mother hadn't lied. The church was hiding something. Suddenly, a voice echoed from above. Caleb. He froze. Pastor Weller's voice. Calm, warm, the same voice that had delivered countless sermons. Footsteps creaked across the sanctuary floor. Caleb's throat went dry. He couldn't be found down here. Not now. Not after reading the journal. He ducked behind the filing cabinets, pressing himself into the shadows, heart hammering against his ribs. The basement door opened. Light spilled down the stairs. Weller's footsteps were slow, deliberate. Caleb could see him now. The tall frame, the dark suit, the silvered hair. He was humming softly, a hymn Caleb remembered from childhood. Weller stopped in front of the locked room, pulling a small key from his pocket. He unlocked the padlock, stepped inside, and closed the door behind him. For several long minutes, the only sound was that strange dripping. Then, muffled movement. Metal scraping. A heavy thud. Caleb's breath hitched. He wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He wanted to scream, but fear clamped his throat. Finally, the door opened again. Weller emerged, locking it carefully before pocketing the key. His expression was calm, almost serene, as he turned and walked back upstairs, humming the same tune. The door shut. Silence fell again. Caleb exhaled shakily, his hands trembling. His mother had been right. Something was hidden here, something Weller never wanted found. And Caleb knew one thing for certain. He had to get inside that room. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Pastor Weller descending into that locked room. He heard the drip, 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 and the scrape of metal. He imagined what might be on the other side of that door. Old church relics, maybe, or something far worse. By dawn, he knew he couldn't just wonder. He had to know. Caleb drove back to the church, parking far down the street so no one would notice his car. Brenton was waking up, the bakery opening, farmers heading out in their trucks. But Caleb slipped through the shadows, heart hammering, his mother's journal pressed against his chest like a shield. The church doors were unlocked. It always was. The town prided itself on open sanctuary. Caleb moved quickly, ducking into the sanctuary, then down into the basement. The stale air hit him again, colder than before. He crept to the locked door. The padlock gleamed, mocking him. Caleb pulled out the small crowbar he'd taken from his father's shed. His palms were slick with sweat, but his grip was firm. He wedged the metal between the lock and the doorframe. His arms strained, his teeth clenched. With a loud snap, the lock cracked open. The sound echoed through the basement like a gunshot. Caleb froze, listening. No footsteps, no voice. Just silence. He pushed the door open. Inside was a narrow stone room, lit by a single dangling bulb. The smell hit him first, sharp, metallic, unmistakable. Blood. His stomach lurched, but he forced himself inside. The room was lined with shelves. Some held old ledgers and church records, but others held jars, dozens of them. Glass jars filled with murky liquid, each containing something inside. Caleb's breath hitched as he realized what he was looking at. Preserved remains. Bones. Fragments. Pieces that looked too human to be explained away. He stumbled back, his hand over his mouth. On the far wall, chained to a metal hook, was a wooden box, its surface dark-stained, carved with a cross. Caleb approached slowly, every instinct screaming at him to run. He lifted the lid. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Black and white at first, then color. Faces of young women, terrified, bruised, some clearly lifeless. His hand trembled as he flipped through them. Then he froze. One photo was different. It was his mother, Mara. She was younger, beaten, her eyes swollen but still burning with defiance. Beneath the photo was a date, 1987. Caleb staggered backward, while rising in his throat. He couldn't breathe. His mother had been right. She hadn't been paranoid. She hadn't been imagining things. Pastor Weller had taken her. The drip, drip, drip grew louder. Caleb turned, finally realizing the sound came from the far corner of the room. A drain in the floor, rust-stained, with a dark puddle spreading outward. He didn't want to imagine what had been washed down there. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from above. Caleb froze, shoving the photos back into the box and slamming the lid shut. He kicked the broken padlock into the corner and pulled the door until it almost closed, leaving only a narrow crack to watch through. The basement door opened. Pastor Weller's heavy steps descended the stairs. His voice was calm, humming the same hymn as before. He walked directly toward the locked room. Caleb's heart raced. He was trapped. Weller stepped inside, his back to Caleb, whistling as he began moving jars on the shelves. He hadn't noticed the broken lock. Not yet. Caleb's breath was shallow, his hand gripping the crowbar, so tight his knuckles whitened. He knew he should run. He knew he should hide. But another thought screamed louder. This is the man who hurt my mother. This is the man who's been hiding bodies beneath God's house. Weller turned, suddenly noticing the missing lock on the floor. His eyes narrowed. He scanned the room. His humming stopped. And for the first time, Caleb saw the mask slip from the pastor's face. The warmth was gone, replaced by something cold. Predatory. Caleb's stomach dropped. He had seconds before Weller realized he wasn't alone. Caleb's breath caught in his throat as Pastor Weller's gaze swept the room. The pastor bent slowly, picking up the broken lock from the floor. He turned it over in his hand, studying it, before lifting his eyes toward the shelves. For a moment, Caleb thought maybe he hadn't been seen. Maybe he could still slip out quietly, unnoticed. But then, "Why don't you step out, son?" Weller's voice was calm, almost gentle. "No need to play games. You've already come this far." Caleb's heart dropped. His whole body screamed run, but his legs felt like stone. Slowly, he pushed the door wider and stepped into the open. The crowbar shook in his hand, his knuckles white. Pastor Weller smiled, but it was a smile Caleb had never seen before. Cold. Empty. Curiosity, the pastor said softly. That's what did this to your mother too. Curiosity, and a refusal to obey. Caleb's breath caught. What did you do to her? Weller tilted his head, as though weighing how much truth to share. Mara, she thought she could expose me. But she misunderstood. I was chosen to carry out God's will. And sometimes, God's will requires sacrifices. Caleb felt the air leave his lungs. You killed her. The pastor stepped closer, his eyes fixed on Caleb like a predator cornering prey. I cleansed her, and I've cleansed many others. This town, this church, stands because of me, because I've kept its sins buried beneath these floors. Caleb's stomach churned. He tightened his grip on the crowbar. You're a murderer. Weller chuckled, low and humorless. No, son. I'm a shepherd. You don't feed the wolves with words. You feed them with blood, so the flock survives. Caleb's mind raced. He wanted to hit him, to end him right there. But the man before him was decades older, yet still radiated power. His calmness was more terrifying than rage. You think they'll believe you? Weller asked suddenly, his voice rising. This town worships me. They bring me their children to bless. They bring me their dead to bury. They will never believe you, just like they never believed your mother. The words cut deep. Caleb's hand trembled, the crowbar feeling heavier than ever. I have proof, Caleb said through clenched teeth. The photos, the jars, the journals. You can't hide it anymore. Weller's expression hardened. The mask of patience cracked, revealing something monstrous beneath. He took a step closer, his voice now a whisper filled with venom. You shouldn't have come here. The pastor lunged. Caleb barely raised the crowbar in time. Metal clanged against flesh as he swung blindly, catching Weller's shoulder. The older man grunted, but his grip was iron as he slammed Caleb back against the shelves. Glass shattered, jars tumbling to the floor. The smell of decay filled the air. Caleb struggled, his arms pinned, the crowbar slipping from his grasp. Weller's face was inches from his own, eyes burning with fury. You're just like her, the pastor hissed. Too stubborn to bow. And now, you'll join her. With a surge of desperation, Caleb kicked out, striking Weller's leg. The pastor staggered back, just enough for Caleb to grab the crowbar again. He raised it high, but Weller caught his wrist, squeezing until Caleb thought his bones would snap. You don't have the strength, boy, he growled. The struggle froze in a brutal stalemate, Caleb's heart pounding, the truth about his mother finally spoken aloud, and the monster of Brenton now unmasked. Somewhere above, the sound of footsteps echoed faintly. Someone else was in the church. Both men froze, listening. And in that silence, Caleb realized, this fight wasn't over. Not here. Not yet. The sound of footsteps above echoed like thunder in the silence. Both Caleb and Pastor Weller froze, their struggle momentarily suspended. Dust rained down from the ceiling as the boards creaked. Someone was moving through the church. Weller's grip on Caleb's wrist loosened slightly, his eyes flicking upward. A flicker of alarm passed across his otherwise composed face. Whoever was upstairs wasn't supposed to be there. Caleb seized the moment. With a burst of strength, he shoved the crowbar forward, forcing Weller back a few feet. Both men stood panting in the dim basement, the tension thicker than the dust in the air. Then a voice. Soft, hesitant. Pastor Weller? Are you down there? Caleb's chest tightened. He recognized that voice. Sarah Whitfield, the pastor's longtime secretary. She was the one who handled the church books, the records, and every donation envelope. For years she'd been at Weller's side like a shadow. Weller's face hardened. Go upstairs, he snapped, his voice booming. This is church business. There was a pause. Then Sarah spoke again, her voice trembling slightly. I heard shouting. I thought. Now, Sarah. Weller roared. Caleb felt a chill. That tone, it wasn't the polished, honeyed voice of a preacher. It was raw, brutal. And judging by the silence above, Sarah had heard it too. Caleb stepped forward, his voice hoarse but strong. Sarah, he killed my mother. He's been hiding bodies down here. Look around you. His words tumbled out, desperate, pleading. Glass crunched beneath his shoes as he gestured toward the shattered jars. The bone fragments scattered across the floor. The smell of rot was undeniable, proof that no excuses could wash away. There was another long pause above. Then, the faint creak of a floorboard, closer this time. Sarah was moving, slowly, cautiously, toward the stairwell. Weller's eyes flashed with rage. He grabbed Caleb's shirt, pulling him close, his teeth bared. You think she'll believe you? She's been mine for years. Loyal. Obedient. She won't turn against me. But even as he said it, his voice cracked. Doubt seeped in. The stairs groaned as Sarah descended, her face pale in the glow of the basement light. Her eyes darted between Caleb, battered and clutching a crowbar, and Weller, looming like a predator in the shadows. Pastor, her voice quivered. What's going on? Weller forced a smile, the mask slipping back into place. This boy is lost, Sarah. Just like his mother. He's been poisoned by lies. I was only trying to guide him back. Sarah's gaze flicked to the shelves, then to the broken jars on the floor. She inhaled sharply, covering her mouth as the stench reached her. Dear God, she whispered. Caleb seized the moment. He killed her, Sarah? My mom, Mara. He's been burying people under this church. Look at the journals. Look at everything. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for one of the scattered ledgers, its leather cover cracked with age. She opened it, then froze. Her eyes widened as she scanned the pages. Names, dates, descriptions of cleansings. Her face drained of color. It's true, she whispered. Something in Weller snapped. He lunged forward, ripping the book from her hands. You don't understand. This is God's will, he bellowed, his voice echoing like thunder against the stone walls. Sarah stumbled back, fear etched across her face. For the first time in decades, she saw the man she had followed blindly for what he truly was. Not a shepherd, a wolf. Caleb stood taller, gripping the crowbar again. It's over, Weller. She knows. Everyone will know. The pastor's chest heaved, his composure shattered. He looked between Caleb and Sarah, his empire of lies crumbling around him. And then, his expression hardened once more. No, he growled. It's not over until I say it is. With a roar, he charged. The basement erupted into chaos. Pastor Weller lunged, his arms swinging wildly, fueled by fury and desperation. Caleb barely managed to dodge, the crowbar clanging against the stone wall as he stumbled back. Sarah screamed, clutching the stair railing as the pastor's shadow loomed over her. Run! Caleb shouted, his voice cracking. Sarah hesitated, frozen by fear, but Caleb's eyes locked onto hers with an urgency that jolted her into motion. She bolted up the steps, her shoes pounding against the creaking wood. Weller snarled and spun toward her, but Caleb swung the crowbar, striking the pastor's arm with a sickening thud. Weller bellowed in pain, staggering back. Go! Caleb cried again, pushing past him. The two of them burst into the sanctuary, the church bathed in eerie moonlight streaming through stained glass windows. The once sacred space now felt sinister, every pew a looming shadow, every corner a trap. Behind them, Weller's footsteps thundered like a beast chasing prey. His voice roared through the silence, guttural and terrifying. You can't run from the will of God. Sarah gasped as they sprinted toward the doors. Where do we go? Anywhere but here, Caleb shouted. They shoved open the heavy wooden doors, the night air slapping their faces as they stumbled out onto the gravel lot. The moon hung low, casting silver light across the empty street. For a brief moment, Caleb thought they might make it. Then Weller appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim glow of the sanctuary. His massive frame filled the entrance, his breathing ragged but relentless. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate. He wasn't rushing now. He didn't need to. He knew the town was his. The streets were silent, the houses dark. No one would come. Not yet. Sarah clutched Caleb's arm, trembling. We can't outrun him. Yes, we can, Caleb said, though his own heart hammered with doubt. They darted across the lot, their shoes crunching against gravel. Sarah's breath came in sharp gasps, fear driving her faster than she'd ever run. Caleb glanced back. Weller was following, not sprinting, but with a chilling confidence, like a predator herding prey. Then a sound split the night. The heavy clang of the church bell. It rang once, deep and mournful, echoing through the town. Sarah stumbled in shock. He rang the bell. Caleb's blood ran cold. The bell wasn't for worship. It was a signal, a call. For decades, Weller had used it to summon his most loyal followers. And now, In the dead of night, the town would come. "We have to move now," Caleb urged. They raced down the road, their lungs burning, their footsteps echoing against the silence. Windows flickered to life in the distance. Porch lights clicked on. Figures stirred. Sarah's voice broke with panic. "They'll all come after us." "Not all of them," Caleb said, though he wasn't sure. "We just need to find someone who'll believe." Behind them, the bell tolled again. And again, each strike louder, more haunting, like the heartbeat of the nightmare closing in. Weller's voice carried across the night, booming with righteous venom. "My flock, awake! The wolves are here." Caleb and Sarah disappeared into the dark woods at the edge of town, branches whipping at their faces, the smell of pine and damp earth surrounding them. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, but they didn't stop. They couldn't. Somewhere in the shadows of the trees, Caleb whispered, "If we stop, we die." The bell tolled once more, and the hunt had begun. The forest was dark and endless, branches clawing at Sarah and Caleb as they stumbled deeper into the undergrowth. Every step felt heavier, every breath like fire in their lungs. For a moment, the only sound was the crunch of twigs underfoot and their own frantic gasps. Then, faintly, the bell. It tolled again, rolling across the hills, echoing through the woods. A sound not meant for prayer, but for war. Sarah clutched her chest, whispering. "They're coming," he called them. Caleb kept pushing forward, forcing his legs to move even as exhaustion bit into him. "We just need distance. If we reach the old highway, maybe." But his words died as voices drifted through the trees. Low at first, then rising like a tide. Men shouting, dogs barking, the crack of flashlights snapping on, beams of white slicing through the forest. Sarah's nails dug into Caleb's arm. "Oh God, they're everywhere." Through the shifting shadows, figures appeared. Townspeople they'd seen in daylight, now transformed into hunters. Old Mr. Carver, who sold fresh bread from his bakery. Two brothers who fixed cars down at the garage. Women in nightgowns, clutching lanterns like torches. And they weren't wandering aimlessly. They were organized, moving in rows, sweeping the woods like soldiers. "Weller trained them," Caleb muttered, realization sinking in. "This was never a church, it's an army." Sarah's breath hitched, tears spilling. "How do we fight an entire town?" Caleb didn't answer. He didn't know. They crouched low, creeping through the brambles, trying to stay ahead of the tightening circle. But the bell tolled again, and with each mournful clang, the search grew louder, faster, closer. Then came the singing. Voices lifted in unison, chanting an old hymn, their words chilling in the night air. It wasn't worship anymore, it was a battle cry. A declaration that the wolves, Caleb and Sarah, would be purged before dawn. Sarah covered her ears, shaking. "They're not people anymore, they're his slaves." Caleb grabbed her hand, pulling her forward. "Then we keep running until we find someone who isn't." They stumbled across an old dirt path, the moonlight glinting off tire tracks. For the first time, hope flickered. "This leads to the highway," Caleb whispered. But just as quickly, the hope shattered. At the end of the path stood a line of townspeople, blocking the way. Their eyes glowed with fanatic devotion, faces calm but terrifying. In their hands were axes, ropes, hunting rifles polished from years of use. And at their center, tall and commanding, Pastor Weller himself. His arm was bandaged from Caleb's earlier strike, but his voice was steady, booming like thunder. "My children," he said, gesturing toward the fugitives, "the wolves stand before you. Tonight, we cleanse them in holy fire." The crowd erupted in a chilling cheer, the sound cutting through the trees like a blade. Caleb's grip tightened on Sarah's hand. They had no way forward, no way back. The circle was closing, and the flock was ready to devour them. Sarah's voice cracked. "This is it." Caleb's jaw clenched, his mind racing. "No. If this town belongs to him, then we have to break it." The bell tolled again, vibrating through the earth. The hymn rose louder. And as the circle of the faithful drew tighter, Sarah and Caleb realized this wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for the soul of Blackwood itself. The air was thick with chanting, the voices of the flock swelling around Sarah and Caleb like a cage made of sound. Pastor Weller stood tall at the head of the line, his hand raised as though conducting the hymn. His shadow stretched long and unnatural in the moonlight. Caleb's heart pounded. He scanned the circle of faces, Neighbors, shopkeepers, mothers, fathers. People who once smiled politely in daylight now looked at him with the blind devotion of zealots. Every set of eyes burned with the same fire, Weller's fire. "Run," Sarah whispered, her hand trembling in his. But Caleb shook his head. "They'll chase us forever unless we break them." Weller's voice cut through the chanting. "The wolves cannot escape. They must be offered. Only then will the town be pure." The flock cheered, raising their lanterns. And then, as if rehearsed, several men stepped forward carrying torches. Sarah's breath hitched. "They're not just hunting us." Caleb's eyes widened. "They're going to burn the forest." And they did. The first torch was hurled into the underbrush. Flames erupted, devouring dry leaves, racing up the bark of a tree. Another torch followed. Then another. The crackle of fire spread in all directions, orange light flickering across fanatical faces. The woods, once their cover, had become their trap. Smoke thickened, choking Sarah's lungs. She coughed violently, clutching her scarf over her face. Caleb dragged her down a narrow ravine, ducking low as the fire crackled above. The heat seared his skin, his eyes watering. Behind them, the flock marched steadily forward, singing louder as the fire roared. The hymn blended with the crackle of burning trees, a sound so eerie it was almost inhuman. Sarah stumbled, falling hard on the rocks. Caleb hauled her up, but her ankle twisted under her weight. She winced, nearly collapsing again. "They'll catch us," she gasped, tears streaking through soot on her cheeks. Caleb's mind raced, desperate. Not if we turn their fire against them. As they stumbled through the smoke, Caleb spotted one of the torches lying half-burned on the ground. He snatched it, gripping it tightly. Sarah's eyes widened in horror. "What are you doing?" "Leveling the field." Through the smoke, the flock closed in, their silhouettes glowing red in the firelight. Weller's voice thundered over the roar of the flames. "Do not fear the fire, my children. It is the Lord's hand guiding us." Caleb lit the torch fully, then swung it toward the nearest tree. The dry branches exploded in flames. The fire leapt faster, climbing and spreading, not just around them, but back toward the advancing crowd. The fanatics didn't flinch at first, walking straight into the rising heat, their hymn steady. But when the flames licked too close, when the smoke choked their lungs, the first scream broke through. Chaos erupted. The flock, once united, splintered in panic. Some tried to stamp out the flames, others fled into the forest. The hymn faltered, breaking into coughing and terrified cries. The fire no longer obeyed Weller. It had become a beast of its own. But Weller himself didn't move. His face remained calm, his eyes locked on Caleb through the flames. And then he smiled. "You think fire will save you?" His voice was steady, almost tender. "It was mine long before you lit that torch." Sarah tugged Caleb's sleeve. "We have to move now." They stumbled deeper into the burning woods, the fire chasing them like a predator. Branches cracked overhead, embers rained down, the ground beneath them glowing hot. Every breath felt like knives. Behind them, Weller's voice rose above the chaos, bellowing through smoke and flame. "You cannot run from God's will. You cannot run from me." Caleb looked back once, through the haze. Weller stood framed in the inferno, the fire outlining him like a crown. His followers screamed around him, but he remained, untouched, unwavering. And in that moment, Caleb realized something chilling. This wasn't just a man. Weller wasn't afraid of the fire because the fire seemed to belong to him. The forest burned like a living creature. Flames climbed higher than the trees themselves, lighting the night sky a hellish orange. Smoke coiled and twisted, turning the air thick, suffocating. Every breath Sarah drew scraped her throat raw, her chest heaving with the effort. Caleb dragged her forward, half carrying her, his own strength fading. Somewhere behind them, the flock scattered like insects, their faith cracking under the reality of fire. Screams rose, distant and sharp, before vanishing under the roar of collapsing trees. But one voice, never wavered. "Caleb, Sarah." Pastor Weller's words cut through the chaos. "Come to me. The fire will not harm you. Only those who resist suffer." Caleb grit his teeth, pushing Sarah forward. "Don't listen. Just keep moving." But Sarah glanced back. Through the smoke, Weller was there, standing tall in the inferno, his coat glowing like embers, his eyes burning with a light that seemed inhuman. Every step he took forward left ash where the ground had been. "He's not stopping," Sarah whispered, terror breaking her voice. "It's like the fire obeys him." Caleb swallowed hard, refusing to look again. "Then we find the bell." They pressed deeper into the woods until, at last, they stumbled into a clearing. There it stood, the ancient church bell. Rusted, weathered, but still upright, as though it had been waiting centuries for this very night. Its surface glowed faintly from the firelight, its shape looming against the smoke-filled sky. Sarah's knees buckled. "You think that thing can stop him?" Caleb nodded, though fear clouded his eyes. "It's not the fire he controls. It's the belief. Break the faith, break him." The ground trembled. Weller was close now. His voice came from all directions at once. "You cannot silence me. I am the voice. I am the flame. Ring that bell, and you'll only summon the end faster." Sarah gripped Caleb's hand, tears streaking down her ash-covered face. "If we do nothing, we die here anyway." Weller stepped into the clearing, the fire curling behind him like a crown of thorns. His flock, what was left of them, staggered after him, singed and broken, but still chanting his name like a prayer. Caleb's chest heaved. He grabbed a fallen branch and swung it against the bell. The sound rang out, deep, heavy, ancient. The earth seemed to pause. The chant faltered. Even the fire stilled, the flames bowing low for a breathless second. Weller's eyes widened. His confident smile cracked. "No, no, not that." Caleb struck it again. The second toll rolled through the forest like thunder. The followers dropped to their knees, clutching their heads, screaming as though the sound was ripping something out of them. Weller stumbled forward, his voice breaking. "Stop. Do you know what you're unleashing?" Sarah, trembling, seized the branch from Caleb and swung with all her strength. The bell rang a third time. This time, the sound wasn't just heard, it was felt. It vibrated in their bones, tore through the smoke, and shattered the chanting like glass. The fire around them shrieked, twisting upward in a spiral before collapsing inward, sucking itself into the ground as though being swallowed. Weller dropped to his knees. His hands clawed at his chest, his eyes wild. "No, they were mine. Mine." Sarah stepped closer, voice shaking but firm. "Not anymore." The bell gave one final echo, long, haunting, almost mournful. And with it, Pastor Weller's body convulsed, his scream rising higher than the flames until silence. His form crumbled into ash, scattering into the night wind. The fire died with him. The forest lay blackened and broken, smoke curling from the ground. The flock that remained collapsed, unconscious, their devotion severed. And in the middle of it all, Caleb and Sarah stood before the ancient bell, its surface now cool and silent, as though nothing had happened. For the first time in hours, the night was quiet. Sarah sank against Caleb, sobbing into his chest. "It's over, right?" Caleb looked at the bell, at the charred earth around them, at the ashes drifting through the air. His voice was soft, heavy. "For us, maybe. But the bell's still here. And someday someone else might hear it." The camera would linger on the bell one last time, silent, waiting, before fading into darkness.